So, Paul, earlier this week, the president, I guess maybe it was now a little more than a week, the president took to Twitter in a bit of a Twitter rage. I'm not sure what initiated this. Maybe you have a better sense, but he criticized the post office for being dumb and basically broke because it was subsidizing Amazon. I imagine part of this is Donald Trump having an issue with Jeff Bezos. But leaving that aside for a moment, this set you off.
It did, because I've thought for a long time that the post office really gets a bad rap. You know, we see this a lot in popular culture. There are portrayals of postal workers as, lazy and incompetent. You think about people like Cliff Clavin on Cheers or Newman on Seinfeld, or, for the kids, I'm sure there are more recent portrayals like that. But that's something that they've been the kind of the butt of jokes for a long time. But the truth is, and I think it just doesn't get said often enough, that the United States Postal Service is actually a marvel. It is something extraordinary. And when I made a response to Donald Trump on Twitter, I found out that I was really not alone in that opinion, that there are millions of people out there who feel the same way, who think that the post office is really something fantastic. And I heard from a lot of them.
Yeah, you quoted Zeynep Tufekci, who is a professor, I believe, at one of the New York universities, originally from Turkey, and she would describe what the American postal system does relative to the one she grew up with in Turkey. And her friends from Turkey thought that she was on some type of payroll, that she was what she was expressing was so impressive.
Yeah, and I think that's something that people also don't realize, is that in a lot of places in the world, I mean, there are places with very, very efficient postal services, but there are also places where just the fact that ours works as well as it does is something that they've never experienced before. And when you think about the magnitude of the task that the Postal Service has to execute every day, it's really extraordinary. I mean, in thinking about this, I went to their latest annual report. And among the things that you'll find there is that in this last year, they delivered 149 billion pieces of mail, which is more than 400 million every day. They process almost half of the entire world's mail volume. They've got 31,000 post offices that they maintain, a lot of which are in places where they're not very profitable to do so. And we can talk about the whole money aspect of it, too. But that's one of the things about the post office, is that they have to serve everybody. And, there are people who say, oh, well, UPS or FedEx could do it better than the Postal Service does. But the truth is that they couldn't, because UPS and FedEx, they get to choose who their customers are. They get to choose where they deliver to. And it's interesting, one of the things that people who work at the post office will tell you is that UPS and FedEx bring packages and mail them through the postal services all the time. Because, if you want to send a package to some sort of far-flung place off on an island or, in some corner of the country, it's not financially viable for UPS or FedEx to deliver it. It just costs too much. But the post office, they have to. They've got to serve everybody, because that's their mandate. That's what they're created for, that they serve every single American, no matter where you live. They are going to bring you your mail. And, and that's another thing that I did as I was writing about this afterward, is that I went to the UPS and FedEx websites just to see how much it would cost to send a letter from the East Coast to the West Coast. And the cheapest rate on FedEx was $29.68. On UPS, it was $34.55. And, of course, to send a letter through the Postal Service, what does it cost? It costs 49 cents. That's it. And that's really something extraordinary when you think about they're going to come to your house, get that letter, take it all the way across the country, and bring it to the house of the person you wanted to send it to in a matter of a couple of days. And it only costs 49 cents.
And the thing I love about your piece in the Prospect talking about the Postal Service, and I want to get to the financial situation in a bit, because I think there's a story there too that I think most people are not aware of. But before we do, in terms of the post office, as you're describing it, is really, it seems to me, a metaphor for why we have a government in many respects, because the post office does not discriminate about doing its job based upon the profitability of that job. And that's why it works. You can't have a functioning postal service if it is just a UPS or a FedEx, because they're not going to serve a massive amount of the country. Why would they? Even at, maybe there is a price that they would do it, but not in a way that would actually serve the vast majority of people. And this is, in many respects, analogous to things like public education, things like Social Security, things like, Medicare, frankly. I mean, these are all services that could only be done by an entity that is not looking to make a profit.
And the interesting irony of it is that, the people who are some of the strongest advocates of privatization, and especially in the Republican Party, for many of them, it's their constituents who would get shut out if we had a completely private system. In places like Wyoming and Idaho and Alaska, those are the places that are the most expensive to serve, and the places where, if the post office wanted to save money, it could shut down post offices in those places. But Congress isn't going to let them do that, because those members of Congress from those places don't want their constituents to lose that service. And that was one of the original ideas behind the creation of the post office. When it was created, when the Postal Service was created, I think in 1775, Ben Franklin was the first Postmaster General, and the idea was that if you were going to have a functioning democracy, you needed a population that could be connected to each other and that could get information. That was the idea behind the Postal Service, was that in order for the people to rule themselves, they had to be able to, receive things like newspapers. And that's why newspapers and magazines get a special rate at the post office, which they have from the beginning, for sending their products through the mail. They get a special rate because the idea is that that's what we need in a democracy. We need to disseminate information. Even if most people aren't, getting important magazines and newspapers through the mail these days, but still it embodies something that was important from the beginning, that this is part of what binds us together in a nation and makes us able to rule ourselves.
Do you think, maybe there's a certain amount of projection involved in my seeing the post office as a perfect model for why we need a robust government, and what a government can do that the private sector can't. Do you think there is an equally as formulated ideological reasons behind the consistent assault on the post office, right? I mean, and there's a little bit, there's an analog a little bit with the DMV, and frankly, the technology is such now that going into the DMV is not a problem at all these days. It strikes me, but this idea of the assault on the post office is because it is an ideological one, because it does represent in some ways the best functioning of a government?
I think that's true, and there's a lot of things going on there. I mean, first of all, it's something that is universal, and that does work well. And I think that conservatives tend to be uncomfortable with any part of government that actually works well. It's one of the reasons that they can't stand Medicare, is because it's so popular. That's the thing that I think the conservatives hate most about Medicare, is that people love it so much. But so there's that element, that it actually works and people like it. There was a Gallup poll that just came out the other day where they asked people to rate whether they thought various government agencies were doing a good job. And the Postal Service came in number one. I think 75% of people said it was doing an excellent or a good job. So there's that part of it. There's another couple of parts, too. First of all, the post office, postal workers are unionized. And I think that sticks in conservatives' craws as well. that you have a very large unionized workforce. And there is also, frankly, a racial element, too, that for a long time, the Postal Service has provided a means for people without a lot of education, without a lot of, that kind of social capital that you can translate into economic capital, to have a path to the middle class. And that meant a lot of racial minorities, particularly African Americans. And, when I wrote that thing on Twitter and then on the American Prospect, that's something I heard again and again and again from people as saying, my dad worked at the post office. He only had a high school education, but he was able to pull us into the middle class. And, me and my siblings, we all went to college. And so I think that there's a class element and a racial element, too, that because it's so visible for so many people that, people who work for the Postal Service can have secure jobs with good benefits, and that for a lot of people, especially African Americans, that has created a pathway to the middle class. That's something that I think that for a lot of conservatives, it violates sort of the story that they tell about what constitutes economic success. At a time when they're trying to destroy union representation everywhere they can, that's a story that's not the one that they want to tell about the American economy.
All right, we got to take a break. I'm talking to Paul Waldman. He's got a piece in the American Prospect entitled "President Trump is Wrong. The Postal Service is an American Treasure." We'll be back in a moment to talk about the nuts and bolts of the attack on the Postal Service and why people get it wrong when they talk about how it is got financial problems. I'm Sam Seder. This is Ring of Fire Radio. We'll be right back after this.